Where were we? We were at factor 9, number 9. Through clinging is conditioned the process of becoming. Upadana, we just discussed that. And number becoming, bhava, that's what we were talking about. Bhava. Bhava is becoming. Now, so need to understand here that because we were, because of thirst, because of desire to experience and re-experience, we would cling to whatever we would like to have in our life again and again. And as we continue to cling to things, our life comes to an end. And then we know that we are not going to live this life forever. And then so what happens is, then we wish, quite naturally, we tend to think that if we can come back, we would be able to continue where we stop in this very lifetime. And so probably we would be able to so experience what we missed during this lifetime. And if we have experienced something, if we have enjoyed something, and we would be able to re-experience in a better way, to a better extent. So now that tendency is the tendency of re-becoming, bhava. That is bhava. Now this is also a tendency. Bhava is a tendency of becoming. Now this tendency, so somewhere else it is called bhava, bhavaraga, which is a latent tendency. It's a latent tendency, the latent or the dormant tendency of coming back to experience, coming back to enjoy what we already have enjoyed, coming back to enjoy what we missed in our lifetime, or coming back to enjoy our favorite things in our life. So that is, and then that desire, so that whole process of becoming, which is bhava, is because of a latent tendency of bhavaraga. Bhava is becoming, and raga is desire, passion. We have passion of coming back, and then and at times people have happened to say that they are so fed up with this life, and they want to end it as soon as possible, and they want to come back in a different way. They want to re-become in a different way. They want to come back in a different way. And that is all about what is meant by here by factor number 9, the clinging. Through clinging is conditioned the process of becoming, upadana paccaya bhava. Then number 10, through the process of, at that point, let's touch upon samsara here. Now, number 7, no, number 8 and number 9. And the number 10, yes. Through the process of becoming is conditioned birth. Now, this is called bhava. Bhava leads to jati. Now, bhava is a whole process. that process continues. As long as we have the tendency of bhavaraga, which is fueled by clinging, we keep coming back to the cycle. And then bhava is the normal process of coming back, the desire for coming back. And because of that, we come back to a specific life form. That specific life form, or that specific life time, specific physical body and mind that we acquire after this lifetime is called jati. One jati. Nowadays, at this jati, my name is, I'm a monk. And I don't know what was my jati during my bhava, during my previous bhava. And I don't know what jati I'm going to be during my future becoming, future bhava. At this point, it's the samsara. We need to think about samsara here. And then you may remember that we came across two definitions of samsara that were during the Buddha, that were existence during the Buddha's time. Now, samsara means so it's samsara. Sara is to Sara is to wander around, to travel. So prefix sam means together. Together. Now, our coming back or wandering around, our travel in a cycle is due to few things together. That's what some means. Now, it is our feeling, touch, desire, and becoming. These four things together. It's called sang, feeling. So that's number. So number 5, right? What is that number? Physical phenomena through faculty conditions and sensorial. Yeah, that's number 5. And number 6, yeah, number 6, contact. And then number 7, desire. And number 8, clinging. And because of these conditions, and then we happen to come back to the cycle. This is called the samsara. Whereas, remember, as we were going through Venerable Rahula's distinction between distinction between Hindu or Indian theistic notion of Atman, and then other theistic notions such as theistic notion in modern day religions like Christianity and Judaism. And so according to Judeo-Christian religions, Atman is created by God, and then so it appears on the earthly level in a certain form, and then but the going back or the reunion of Atman, soul, with God, with the divine, is decided at the judgment. So in case judgment, if we fail, so that if we fail at our judgment, and we would have to go to an awful state called purgatory or hell, and that is according to one example, is that's the Christian idea. And the Hindu idea of Atman is that, well, just like in Christianity, God created us, and then, but at that point, there's no judgment. There's no judgment day. There's no judgment. He created us, and then we would. So as we comes into worldly being from our transcendental reunion, that is with God, and when as we were created, when our Atman was given life, and then so that we appear, we come down to earthly level, so that worldly level from our transcendental level of God. And then what happens? Unlike in Christianity, in Hinduism, as we come into the worldly level, we get contaminated. Our soul, our Atman gets contaminated with the worldly touch. It gets adulterated with the earthly touch. And as a result, as long as, however long it takes us to so purify ourselves, purify our soul, our Atman, so long as we are not achieving our purification, we have to remain in the cycle, acquiring different bodies, acquiring different jati, different life forms. And that is samsara according to Hinduism. So at that point, samsara in Hinduism has a connection to Brahman. It has a cosmic connection, as we discussed that in our previous coursework. So samsara in Hinduism has a vertical connection. It's a cosmic connection. So the only difference between Atman in Christianity is that in Hinduism, there's no judgment day. There's no judgment. And so we are responsible for our own purification, so that you keep coming back to samsara in different life forms, and then during which process you are responsible for your self-purification. In case you get your purification delayed, as long as you don't get yourself purified until whichever time it takes, however long it takes, then you will have to remain in the samsara. Now that is the bhava, and that is jati according to Hindu idea. But whereas according to Buddhism, so that the samsara is not a cosmic, it doesn't have a cosmic connection. It simply has, it is simply an internal process. So that, and then according to theistic notion, all Atmans, all souls come from God. Whereas according to Buddhism, our Atman, our soul, our Atman, it has no such central authority over. And our Atman don't generate from one place, one birthplace, called the divine or Brahman or God. Whereas, and then so we have our own identity as Atman. And on different occasions, Buddha was asked when our Atman started, when we started our samsaric journey. And Buddha simply said, the beginning, beginning of our birth, beginning of our origin is untraceable, cannot be traced back. And we don't know when we started our samsara. And then so that we don't know, so that in general, we don't know when we are going to end our samsara. And then Buddha called this, so the starting point, that's called, so that nobody would be able to say when we started our samsara. Now, at that point, when you look at the samsara, the beginning and end of the samsara, so that in Christian terms, according to Christian belief, or our beginning occurred from God. And what about our ending, our salvation? Well, and it happens when we go back to God, the divine. And according to Hinduism also, so that we came from Brahman, and one day, even though we don't know when we are going, when we are going back to Brahman, sooner or later we will go back to him again. That's also the end of samsara. According to Buddhism, being a non-theistic, Buddhism is non-theistic or anthropocentric. Oh, I'm one missing. So Buddhism is a non-theistic religion. It is an anthropocentric, or man-centered, not God-centered. It's God-centered. It's man-centered religion. Everything is internalized. Our existence, our coming back, this very lifetime, and then whichever life form we're going to acquire upon death from this lifetime is all because of our ignorance, because of our craving, because of tendency of touch, because of our tendency of clinging, and because of our bhavaraga, our tendency of rebecoming. See, all these are mental tendencies. These inner tendencies together contribute towards our getting recreated, in a certain life form, which is samsara. So the samsara, according to Buddhism, is purely an internal process. It's not a cosmic process. Any questions to that effect about that? Okay, then through the process of becoming is conditioned birth. Because of our desire to re-become bhava, we come back to a certain, we reacquire. We come back to life. We come back to samsara in a different life forms. So there's a nice story about bhavaraga, or the tendency of re-becoming. Now, a man, so he was not happy with his human life, and he had a decent life, but this is a parable. This is an example. Now, close to his death, he wanted to come back to samsara as a human being with who would be able to enjoy all kind of material comfort and luxuries, like a king. Or if not, he must go to heaven afterwards. Now, close to his life, and he had done something. He hadn't committed some bad karma as well, and then close to his death, he was guilty. But at the same time, he wanted to come back to samsara to continue to enjoy his existence, but the next time in a better way, in a way that he would not fail. Now, close to there, he was guilty of of lots of things that he had done in his life because of the bad karma that he's committed, and then he was now having negative feelings. At the same time, think this is an example. This is a psychological example, and then what happens was, now according to Buddhist teaching on death, so that karma nimitta and gati. close to our death, at our death, we would see the very karma that a certain karma that we committed during our lifetime. It could be a good karma, it could be a bad karma. This is karma. Or we wouldn't simply see the karma that we committed, that we made, good or bad. And we would simply see the nimitta or the background of that karma. For example, let's say somebody is a serial killer. A serial killer would have a vision of the gun or the weapon that he used to kill all the people, all the victims. The weapon that he used, maybe a sword or a weapon or a gun. And so that is called the background. And he would simply see in his mind, he would see a part of the background to his karma. And that's called karma nimitta. In certain cases, the man would see gati nimitta. I misspelled the previous time. Gati. Gati literally means going. Where we are going afterwards. Gati literally means going. Gati. And then gati nimitta means where are we going to go afterwards, after this lifetime. Now, according to that story, now the man was he was guilty. And by the way, somebody at his death, somebody would see one or two or all of these three conditions. So that someone now who is going to die is now about to breathe his last breath would either see karma, the very karma that he made, or not the karma, but the karma nimitta, or the background of the karma, or maybe a combination of karma and karma nimitta, or karma, little bit of karma, or karma nimitta, or gati nimitta. Gati is where we're going to go afterwards. Now, according to that story, now he wanted to come back to humanity to enjoy more and more things and enjoy to a better extent. Because even though he had enjoyed his life, but at the same time, he had done bad things as well. But at the same time, he was not happy with the way he enjoyed his life. So that for sure, he wanted to come back and enjoy his life better by coming back to humanity. Or he wanted to go to heaven. But what happens is, now that he is guilty of certain things that he has done, and that is now creating a negative surroundings at the same time, so that he's now having a vision of what he's going to become, what the kind of life form he's going to acquire upon death. Let's say now he feels like he is going to, now this is humorous, this is an example only. Now he sees he's having a vision of himself being an animal, wildlife, maybe a pig, a hyena, a fox, an animal. When he see that event, and he feels like that is he's going to go, and now he is feeling that that is going to be his eventuality. He would end up getting created. He would end up becoming an animal. At that point, what happened? The point is yet to be made. Now he's about to. His death is just few moments away, and then what happens is, for sure, he feels that is what he's going to come back as. He's going to come back as an animal, and he's going to miss humanity. He's going to miss divinity, but he is going to come back in animal form. At that point, what time he makes up his mind. So that's the point here, as Buddha says. he makes up his mind to accept whichever life form he is going to acquire after death. Why is that? It is like something is better than nothing kind of situation. And then because of dormant tendency of coming back, finally he makes up his mind. He's forced to make up his mind to come back as an animal. So that is when Buddha says, if you don't have bhavaraga, or the tendency of re-becoming, of course, so that you don't have any idea, you are not attached to samsara. Of course, when you don't have attachment to samsara, actually automatically you may acquire a good life form the next time. Why? When you are hopeful, when you anticipate being able to acquire, if you design your next comeback in layman's language, you may, or when you think about the way you must come back, so that during this lifetime itself, you become anxious. You become anxious, and then that anxiety can have a bigger impact on your existence, especially at death. That can have a negative impact on your death. So that is when Buddha says, now, if you really want to come back to samsara, so that don't force yourself to design it. Don't force yourself, okay, I must come back as a human being. I must come back in divine form. So that at that point, Buddha discourages his followers to rely on the future comeback. Now, as you know, according to Buddhism, samsara has, excuse me, let's try. Thank you. So samsara has 3 timelines. Past samsara that we would not remember, present samsara, which is this lifetime that we are experiencing right now, and the future samsara, whichever life form we're going to acquire in the afterlife. I mean, upon death from this lifetime. Now, those are the 3 lifetimes. Now, in different places, Buddha says, what is unfortunate of human beings, most human beings, is that they rely on the past samsara, even though they don't see their past samsara, and they would, when they express their dissatisfaction about this very lifetime, this person's samsara, and they would tend to assume that they are not being able to enjoy this lifetime because of the bad karma they did during their past samsara. And the people put the blame on their past samsara, and so their failure, their dissatisfaction, their disappointment, and whatever the negative situations they go through during this samsara at this point means this lifetime, and they hold their past samsara responsible. And Buddha said, then who are they holding responsible for their failures within this samsara? They are holding they hold themselves responsible. Why? Past samsara is their own samsara. And so that, and then whatever. Some people put the blame on their past samsara, and some so that they are fed up with this samsara so much that they want to end this samsara and to move to future samsara. And that is when they do wishful thinking. And then so people lament their past samsara, even though they don't know clearly what they were before coming to this lifetime. And they easily put the blame on their own past samsara. and then or they are fed up with the point of reference is not their past but the future, and so they wish that they come back, they design, they in their imagination they design their next comeback, future samsara. So the point what Buddha makes is most people get into trouble during their empirical existence because they fail to face the realities in this very samsara, meaning in this realities within this samsara, within this lifetime, and so that they trouble, they jump between their past and the future, and as a result out of insecurity that they would encounter during this lifetime, and so that would worsen the situation. So and then human potential as is such that so that we are unlike other beings, we are able to face and make adjustments and corrections to this very lifetime. People are blessed with what is called the power of reasoning, and most people don't use their power of reasoning so that they can very easily justify why they fail to do so. But actually, given the fact that we are rational beings, that we are blessed with the power of reasoning, we are not excused for our failure to face this very lifetime. And what is more important of these three timelines of samsara, what is important is not this lifetime. Not unknown past life timeline, not the unknown future timeline, but this very timeline, the present timeline. So this is more important. Now, at that point, so Buddha had made a statement, and everyone is familiar with that. Live in the present moment. Live in the present moment means moment represents the present timeline of samsara. Memory is the moment. The moment is gone. When the moment is history, is the memory. When the moment is still unreal, is yet to become, is the dream. So memory, that is our past samsara. A moment, that is our present samsara. Dream, wishful thinking, that is our future samsara. So these are the three timelines, and we would love to rely on our memory or on our dreams, and then so that because we want to escape the moment, because we are scared of the moment. We don't like to face the moment. Why? The moment can terrify us. The moment can scare us. So we get frightened, we get shaken by the moment. And so that we would either rely on our past, our memory, that is our past samsara, or our future samsara, that is our dreams. Any questions so far?
Bante.
Yes. Sorry, yes. Please go ahead.
The story that you just said, what if that person refused to accept, still wanted to not to become an animal? Will he become a human then?
No, at that point it's too late for him to decide, because at that point it's a very good question, because he has already, now he's already dead halfway through, because his consciousness is going to shut down very soon, because he has already died from his what is called he's half dead from his his selfhood. Now a dying person, and then now socially he the social layer of selfhood has diminished already. And now he doesn't even feel his physical body. And then he's getting all his energy concentrated in his heart. And then so that he doesn't feel the function of most of his limbs. I have noticed that. I have seen that actually. When one of my guru monks passed away, he died on my lap. I was very young. And I saw he's a very fair-skinned person. First he died. I saw his fingertips and toe tips turning dark, and then slowly, and then so he stopped moving, starting from nerve endings, from toe tips and fingertips, and then finally he started. Minutes later, he started. His chest area started shaking a little bit, but every other area is silent. And then so that he started dying from his limbs, and finally energy got concentrated around his heart. And so that's so first our sense faculties, our eyes, our nose, our tongue, and our body, our skin, our mouth, those sense faculties so stop functioning. And then one last thing is still functional is our ears. So that's why, according to how to say now death related rituals and mannerisms in certain countries, so when somebody is dying, the loved ones are not supposed to make any sound, make any noise. They are not supposed to cry. They are supposed to maintain perfect silence. Why? Because the dying person can still hear very well. And then he would stop seeing things, but he could still have the ability to hear things until the last moment. So a certain sensual faculty could still be functional, but most of he died from the social level, and then his perception starts diminishing, and then he stopped perceiving, experiencing through his sense faculties. And then there's no time for him to go back and change his decision. So that whatever the reality, whatever the eventuality he is going to face, and he has to accept it. And subconsciously, it happens subconsciously at that point, because he's not functional on the conscious level. He is functional in subconscious level, but still he could hear you cry. And then the answer is, it's too late for him to go back and then to make a determination, to make a resolution to come back to humanity or go to divinity. Because
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So because the selfhood is already half the death, the process is halfway through now. So it's too late for him to make any decisions. And then that is number 10. And number 11, through birth are conditioned decay, death, lamentation, pain, etc. Number 12, 11 and 12 are considered, they are, so that it's combined. Now, through birth are conditioned. Now, lots of people have asked me why they must achieve nirvana. Because why nirvana? And then so I'm happy with this lifetime, so I don't want to have nirvana. And the answer to that question is, if you yourself or something or someone can guarantee that you come back to samsara, only to experience good things like happiness, and never to go through old age like decay, death, lamentation, pain, etc., then you may not need to achieve nirvana. But because there's no guarantee that life, the newly acquired life, the life acquired upon death, is going to be all happy, all fascinating, all positive, all optimistic, then you don't need nirvana. But there's no such guarantee, because so that in order to avoid the repeated cycle of decay, that is old age and death and lamentation, pain, etc., in order to avoid the cycle of pain, repeatedly experience negativities like decay, old age, death, lamentation, despair, etc. So the nirvana is valued. So nirvana, you can go for nirvana. So that is how the nirvana is valued. Now, so the value of nirvana is based on the nature of samsara. If the samsara is all good, it's all fascinating, all positive, then you may continue to come back in different life form, then you may remain in the samsara. But who guarantees that? There's no one to guarantee that it's going to be all good. Because of that, but you already know how risky it is to live this lifetime. And Buddha encourages us to see the value of nirvana based on our life experience. Have you been all good, all happy throughout your lifetimes up to this moment? Have you never been angry? Have you ever been angry? Have you ever been disappointed? Have you ever broken up with people? Have you cried, lamented? Have you experienced any pain, whether mental or physical? Has your life all been good? And the life has been all perfectly, completely absent of all the negative things? And if you say yes, and then you may then choose to remain in the samsara, and so that you don't need nirvana. So that's how Buddha explains the value of nirvana at this point. So any questions?
So it looks like there's a question in chat for you.
Yeah, okay. See, thank you for opening it. Bante, Theravada Buddhism, what is the Pali word and succinct definition of consciousness? So that is consciousness is again, so that's the three levels actually so I think that we touched on that somewhere. So, and then so the definition of, in order to have a satisfactory definition of consciousness, you need to look at all these three terms: sanya, that is perception, that never stops. That never stops even in our dreams. Sanya is perception, and vijnana is an area of so that it's another area of our consciousness that makes assumptions, that make decisions, that collects, that gathers all our decisions, all our data. That is vijnana. So the vijnana is the area of consciousness that we store our karma, our habits, our experience, our memories, and any data that we gather from through our sense faculties, including our conclusions and assumptions. And panya, so panya is panya is a level. So sanya and vijnana, perception, sanya and vijnana are built in. So built-in areas. Those are built-in areas of consciousness. Whereas panya is the ability. So consciousness has the self-transforming ability. So panya is considered another tendency actually. Panya is wisdom. Now, and then so sanya is perception. On the perception level, we get deluded, we get misdirected, and we fail to see have a clear true nature of our existence. That is because of sanya, perception, because perception is based on our sensory needs, and so that we are already biased. We are biased towards what we see, or we are biased against what we see through our sense faculties. And then again, because of the fact that we make the conclusions or assumptions that we make, or the data that we gather are affected by our biases, so that again consciousness remains in trouble because of perception, problem with perception, and then the problem with data collection, and then collection of data that is called memory, karma, and habits. So that is consciousness is consciousness is weak, is not perfect by nature, but at the same time, consciousness comes with the ability to rectify itself, to transform itself, and that ability is called panya, wisdom. So, and those are the three areas. Based on those three areas, we understand consciousness. But again, the definition is consciousness is a reality, or a phenomena. It's a phenomenon that is constantly changing, constantly getting adulterated, modified, transformed. So in other words, it is the conditionally existent soul or Atman. That's how could I say? Is the answer good enough, or is the answer good, or you want me to clarify more? Okay, yeah, because actually consciousness is one of the, there have been so many books, there are so many sutras on the nature of consciousness. Because consciousness, why it is difficult to define consciousness in Buddhism, it is not a simple entity like soul in theistic religions. Because you cannot explain consciousness without the conditions. Without the conditions, without an explanation of conditions and causes and conditions that continue to modify, continue to adulterate, continue to downgrade, or continue to upgrade it. So it is a relative power actually. Consciousness is a relative mental energy. It's relative because its existence is relative to something else. Whereas Atman or soul, according to Hinduism and Christianity, other religions, it's not a relative power. It's not a relative energy. It is intact all the time. Even after death, it doesn't go through any transformation according to Hinduism and According to Hinduism, Christianity, other theistic religions. So that consciousness is like a reflections of many things. And then so when the conditions, you can very easily disintegrate, you can deconstruct, you can theoretically deconstruct consciousness as taught in Buddhism, but you can do that in Christianity or in Hinduism. Because why? Soul, that is similar to consciousness in Buddhism, is one single entity, whereas in consciousness is not uniform one single entity. So it is like a jigsaw puzzle. It's made of different pieces. When the pieces are put together, and then so just like the different mechanical parts are put together, and you make the engine, car engine, so that it can run. Likewise, consciousness is made of different parts. It's constantly nurtured by experience, nurtured by memory, nurtured by dreams, and so that it has different levels and it functions different level. When it functions sanya level, on perception level, and so that so it's constantly remain interconnected with the world, even in our dreams, that is sanya. And then at the same time we make lots of conclusions and assumptions, and we keep gathering all our memories, data, karma, habits, and all that is on the vijnana level. And then at the same time, somebody gets fed up with this whole process, and then what happens is he wants to move away from these sanya and vijnana, because his own biases landed him in trouble. And so that is why so he made some conclusion, but still, and he continues to suffer. But if you give up all your biases, and then so that you stop being subjective, and you start adopting what is called start using the objective approach, at that point you are purposely transforming your typical consciousness, which is otherwise nurtured by sanya and vijnana. And then so when you come to that level, so that your consciousness is put in panya mode. If you consider these modes, panya level, panya mode, at that point you stop being subjective, and then you try your best not to be biased towards or against. And so that at that point you are practicing wisdom. So unless you are reduce the subjectivity, the lesser the subjective approach, the lesser the subjectivity, and then your level of wisdom is high. So in order to achieve that, selfhood is deconstructed theoretically, and then instead of looking at the selfhood, our selfhood as one single reality that is intact, we divide into five divisions, 5 parts, and this is called the 5 aggregates. So that's what Buddha has done throughout his teachings. He has on the conventional level, he has spoken of, he has accepted that people do exist. We have a personality, we have needs as conventional beings, and life is there. But but enlightened people, like I, unlike most unenlightened people, Buddha as an enlightened person, he defines everything from an approach of what is called the absolute truth. And so that if Buddha is looking at his own body, and he wouldn't be specifically fanciful, or he is not specifically fascinated by his physical body, and he is not hateful of his physical body, because he doesn't have his approach, which is objective, is free from attachment, it is free from attachment, so that he doesn't have any biases. He is free from attachment, so that he can very easily see that his selfhood, that his physical body, and the two mechanisms of psychology and corporeality, the mind and body, are two different things. At the same time, they are put into two different things: nama, name, that is mind, and rupa, that is physical body. And then again, they are made of five things again. Then he divides nama, which is mind, into four more things. And then that is called rupa, the first one, that is the physical body. And then vedana is sensation, that is the first part of the psychology, the mental part of our selfhood. Then that is sensation, vedana, sanya, that is perception, sankhara, that is so accumulation, so the karmic formations, and then vijnana, the area of consciousness where we deposit, where we harbor, where we gather all kind of data, that is memory, karma, and habits. So that is how we explain vijnana, consciousness. So see, so far we can keep, we can continue to describe vijnana, but still we would not be happy, because consciousness is very different than soul. It's very difficult to explain that in few words, right? So then what happens, as I said, according to if we go through decay, 11 and 12, we go through decay, we encounter decay or aging, death, lamentation, pain, it's all that because we come back to life. What if we don't come back to samsara? Then we will never go through decay, death, lamentation, pain, etc. again. That is where the value of nirvana. Let's look at the other parts now. So those are the 12 factors, or 12 steps or factors of interdependent origination. And then, this is the, dependent origination, the teaching on dependent origination is given in 2 steps. And so this is called the Pachaya step. Pachaya, that is formation. This is the formation step. And this explains, Pachaya means depending on one factor leads to the creation of the next, formation of the next one. And so Nirodha. So the formula of dependent origination consists of 2 steps. First step is the Pachaya step, that is the formation step. Second one is the Nirodha, or the cessation step. Then, according to that teaching, then what happens is, and then you reverse everything. What if you are, so this is, there's a certain order because of ignorance, and then we come back to life. Because we come back to life, I'm not going through the, I'm just saying in general, in conclusion, because of ignorance, we have desires. Because of desires, we feel sensation. Because of sensation, we never feel like giving up, so that we cling to things. Because of clinging, we are not happy with and we want to continue. Even we need to come back even after death, so that and then as we come back, we don't care that we go through aging and sufferings and sense how to say disappointment, despair, and all negative things, but still we want to come back. Now that is formative. That is the formative stage and the formation stage, and there's a cessation step also. But when you, what if you stop having trishna or tanha, then what happens? So, and then you are not interested in attachment. You stop tanha. When you stop tanha or desire or thirst, and so that then you stop clinging to things. When you stop clinging to things, you never want to come back to samsara. And so that is called the cessation step of the dependent origination, and we don't need to go through that actually. So and then next, this is how life arises, exists, and continues. If we take this formula in its reverse order, okay, see, Venerable Rahul is now coming to that. If we take this formula in its reverse order, we come to the cessation of the process. Now that is a conclusion. Please, if possible, remember that statement. This is how, if we take this formula in its reverse order, we come to the cessation of the process. Now, so the process that we have so far explained, so that is the formation of the process, continuation of the process. So Pache also means formation or continuation. So when you put the continuation process in the reverse order, then you start the reverse process. So the reverse in the process, so that you can stop the cycle. That is how the samsara is stopped when you put the formula in the reverse order. Through the complete cessation of ignorance, volitional activities or karma formations cease. Through the cessation of volitional activities, consciousness ceases. Through the cessation of birth, decay, death, sorrow, etc. cease. See, remember going back to that at the beginning. So see that formula, the 4-line formula, the formula of the 4 lines. When this is, that is. Imasming sati idang hoti. This arising, that arises. Because there is ignorance, there is craving. When ignorance arises, craving arises too. What if you stop ignorance? Then craving would not have time, would not have opportunity to arise. So meaning, when this is not, that is not. And then when ignorance ceases, and then trishna or tanha ceases too, or it will never come back. Actually, it will never occur, it will never happen. So that's why in order to, whenever you start formulating some answers, or maybe you write a definition or an essay on dependent origination, please start with this formula, this 4-line formula. And so that is the starting point actually. So when you put, and then both the formation or the continuation process and the cessation process is understood in light of this formula of 4 lines. So, and then, so it should be clearly remembered that each of these factors is conditioned, paticca samuppanna, as well as conditioning, paticca samuppada. Therefore, they are all relative, interdependent, and interconnected, and nothing is absolute or independent. Hence, no first cause is accepted by Buddhism, as we have seen earlier. Conditioned genesis should be considered as a cycle, as a circle, not as a chain. Wow. Now this is a statement that Venerable Rahula makes. Actually, please note it down as well. So the conditioned genesis or the dependent origination is not considered a chain. And most of the time, the question being asked to when life began and when life ends is a question of chain, not a question of circle. So according to Buddhism, it's not a chain. Now, in theistic religions, you clearly see the start. The first link of the chain is God. And what is the last one? Last one is going to be God. It's more like a chain. And then you were sent to the earthly level, and one day you go back, whenever that be. Whereas in Buddhism, it's considered a circle, not a chain. Any questions about circle and chain? Okay. And then the question of free will has occupied an important place in Western thought and philosophy, but according to conditioned genesis, this question does not and cannot arise in Buddhist philosophy. So let me repeat. The question of free will has occupied an important place in Western thought and philosophy, but according to conditioned genesis, this question does not and cannot arise in Buddhist philosophy. If the whole of existence is relative, conditioned, and interdependent, how can will alone be free? Will, like any other thought, is conditioned. So-called freedom itself is conditioned and relative. Such a conditioned and relative free will is not denied. So that's where the problem of freedom actually. Now, so remember, going back to our teenagers, people, children in their individual teenagers, and then they think about independent, think about free life. But actually, Buddhism doesn't accept the idea of independence. It is always interdependence is interdependence versus independence. So in Buddhism, it is interdependence versus independent. Now, so the Buddhist philosophy does not approve or talk about what is called independent. It does talk about interdependence. Now, our freedom is dependent upon a multitude of causes and conditions. Now, now when you are an underage, and then so that you have to listen to your parents, you are under the care of your parents or guardians, and then so that's why even if you make some decisions based on your own conscience, and then the moral law and the law of the land would not approve that. Because you come across that in criminology, in justice, in criminal justice. So I have read some stories like young people, underage girls and boys, and so that they had a sexual relation with adults, but when the law enforcement or the judge asked the underage people, and they said, well, nobody forced me into that. I wanted that. It was consensual that I wanted to do that. But the judge would say, even if you were, nobody forced you to do that, but as an underage, you cannot make that decision. So that's how it is. So that our freedom is restricted during our childhood, during our teenage, and then when you become an adult also, and you continue to get your freedom restricted, depending on where you live, depending on the cultural landscape, depending on the legal landscape, depending on the physical landscape that you are in. And so that, and always your freedom, your independence is needs, you can have a sense of independence by sacrificing lots of things. It's not easy to feel independent because of that because of the nature of our existence, our empirical existence. So our existence is essentially naturally empirical, based on our experience. And then can you point to existence and say, this is my life? Whenever define your existence, whenever you describe, analyze your existence, you always, the point of reference that you use is a certain life condition or life situation. And you would simply say, for example, so if I ask you to define yourself, you would do that based on your ethnic background, or your family background, your professional background, your qualifications, credentials, your social status, and your desires, your dreams, your motivation, your sensations. And that's how you always, your definition of life, your definition of existence is based on not on one thing, based on few things. Even your definition of life, even your definition of existence is conditional, because you use lots of different conditions to come up with the vague idea, vague definition, idea of vague definition of self-identity. So that is because of the interdependent nature of our existence. Nobody is free from, nobody is totally independent. You can free yourself from those causes and conditions. That's how our life is. So that free will. Yes, Buddhism also talks about free will, but what Venerable Rahula is saying, this is, he's not denying the fact that Buddhism also does accept free will, but he is specifically talking about the important place free will is given in Western thought and philosophy. But according to the definition of dependent, according to this fundamental teaching of dependent origination, paticca or conditioned genesis, so that there's no question. There's no question about free will. We are free to a certain extent. We are independent to a certain extent. And then it's not because the legal system is not responsible for our restricted freedom, restricted independence. Morality, or the social norms are not responsible for our independence, for our fight, for our willingness, for our dream of independence. That's the way our life is. The life is, the creation of life is by a multitude of causes and conditions. And then once life was created, the very existence is also based on a multitude of causes and conditions. And then it is on the physical level, when it comes to our physical body, And physical body is conditional because it constantly needs to be nurtured with food, nutrition. And when it comes to our mind also, mind needs to feel something. Mind needs to remain occupied with something. And that mind remains occupied with something means it always goes through some negative and positive things as a result of different kinds of feelings that we create. And the mind gets adulterated. So minds get weaker or stronger. So again, our mind itself is conditional. Our body is conditional. And so life is conditional. And so that, so there's no purpose, there's no question of free will in Buddhism, in Buddhist philosophy. And question is not actually asked. But you can still have a sense of free will. How? Because when you make a conscious effort to revisit your selfhood, redefine your selfhood, reanalyze your selfhood from not from the subjective approach, but from the objective approach, and then so that so that's where the importance of nirvana comes into play. Now that is the definition of spirituality as well. What is spirituality? What is the purpose of spirituality? The purpose of spirituality is to elevate yourself cognitively, and then so that you elevate yourself cognitively. So that cognitive shift, cognitive elevation of yourself by using the objective approach, and so that you stop, so that you become less and less dependent on your sanya and vijnana, and you begin to use your wisdom, which is panya, or unbiased approach. So yes, interdependence, nature exists in samsara, has a dependency on sanya and vijnana of self and other. Is the guidance in Theravada Buddhism to continue to develop panya aspect, to be aware of sanya and vijnana arising and still maintain interdependence? Yes, as it is. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, that's the answer. So that continuation, yeah, because parallel to as sanya and vijnana continue to contaminate, continue to make us, yeah, I would say that free will can truly be practiced in the way we respond to our karma. Yes. For example, when karma comes to fruition upon you, it's up to us not to be swayed by emotionally or given it to create more karma. Exactly, absolutely. You are absolutely right. Yes, Kaya. And that is a conclusion. Yes. So, as we see the interconnection between sanya and vijnana and subjective approach, and the interconnection between panya and objective approach. That's the whole purpose of sati. The whole purpose of Satipatthana Sutra, the sutra on the 4 foundations of mindfulness. And you theoretically deconstruct your selfhood into 4 areas. Physical body, and physical body is one foundation of mindful living, panya. And then second area is mind itself, and third area is feelings or sensations, and then fourth is dhamma, or meaning the conditions, social, and then individual, and conditions. Those are the 4 areas of our selfhood. So at the Satipatthana, in the Satipatthana Sutta, and the selfhood is divided into 4. 4 areas. But again, this is deconstruction. Why? Because see, so that is common throughout the Buddha's teachings. And then while he accepts the existence of individuals on the conventional level, given the true nature of our existence, true nature of our selfhood, we are not a uniformed single entity. We are, I am, you are, we are all an entity made of many things, just like the pieces of a jigsaw puzzle. Yes, based on one's action, how does one differentiate between what was of the karma created more karma? Based on one's action, how does one differentiate between what did was of the karma or create more karma? Yeah, actually, that is where we need to be mindful. Now, as Kyle mentioned that before also, now karma leads to more karma. So that is when we need to have, at that point we use what is called the fourfold under the fundamental teaching of Four Noble Truths. The fourth truth is the truth of the path leading to the cessation of suffering. Remember the Four Noble Eightfold Path. According to Noble Eightfold Path, right effort is called right effort according to the Four Noble Eightfold Path is a fourfold energetic effort, and that is what we must use to stop karma leading to the creation of more karma. Otherwise, the cycle never stops. Actually, the cycle becomes much stronger, and then we would continue to remain in the cycle for a longer period of time. What are these? What is the fourfold energetic effort? So that, and it is called now. So that prevention of unwholesome thoughts and feelings that are yet to arise. Removal of unwholesome thoughts and feelings that have already arisen. And third one, so that bringing into fruition of the wholesome thoughts that are yet to arise. And then enhancement of wholesome thoughts and feelings that have already arisen. Now, this is called the fourfold energetic effort, and the right effort according to the teaching on the Noble Eightfold Path. So that, yes, how does one know what it was the karma or creating more karma? Yeah, that's where the problem is, and that corresponds to the Buddha's teaching on the unknown self. Remember, and then and Buddha goes to a supernatural extent. Now, we don't know how much karma we brought into this life from our past life. And then within this life itself, we have totally forgotten how much karma we made, right? So the only way to so that to answer this question as to how does one know what did was of the karma or creating more karma is all depending on our awareness, our mindfulness. We have to see the pattern of our karma. In case you continually repeat the same karma, that is because it has become habitual. Why habitual? Why habit? because that is what because you feel like enjoying it again and again. That is what you want. That is what you want to happen in your life. So, so that the only way to know that karma leads to the creation of more karma is by understanding, by seeing the pattern of your action, pattern of your karma, and in light of your desires. At times, some people have a chronic habit of repeating the same karma, even if they know that, because it has become chronic, and they are guilty at the same time, motivated to repeat. So, what about that answer? So that's all I could say. How does one know what it was of the karma or creating more karma? And karma, once created, karma is beyond our control. Probably the only way to stop karma leading to more karma is just to memorize as much karma as possible that you have committed, that you have made within this lifetime, starting from the most recent and going back to the past, and identify the pattern, identify the way you have done that, and whether to see whether you are wanting to repeat that because of your chronic habit or because of your instantaneous will or wish to enjoy the same thing again and again, depending on that. So did I answer that question? It's the mindfulness, actually. You need to have a conscious effort, mindful effort to see the pattern of the karma. There's no other way to do that. Or that's when meditation comes into play as well. In meditation, you can see the pattern of your feelings, see the pattern of your you can see the thought patterns, feelings, the way you have, the way you want to have certain things, and probably you have your own signature feelings. And then so that even in meditation, I know you are not supposed to attach to a certain fascinating feeling in your meditation. I know some meditators, they only want to experience one particular feeling during their meditation. When that doesn't occur, they get frustrated, actually, because so in meditation really helps us to create the necessary surroundings by not attaching to clinging to a certain feeling, a negative or positive. And then you, in meditation, through mindful breath, and you simply continue to see the coming and going, the rising and falling of your feelings, your mental conditions. And so that when you see the whole flow of the stream of thoughts and feelings that occur, that you see during meditation, and then slowly you develop you develop what is called dispassionate discernment, not passionate discernment. Our discernment is always passionate, because we start doing that with some purpose, with some agenda, with some motive behind our action. Whereas in meditation, you are not passionate, you are dispassionate. And then you continue to discern or to closely look, so to discern means to closely observe. And then so your close observation of mental conditions is not passion. There's no passion. Passion does not have a role in your close observation or discernment. It is dispassionate. It's free from discernment. It's free from attachment, free from passion, so that you can see, and then you stop qualifying or rejecting or accepting certain feelings that you see through in your meditation. You simply you look at all feelings similar. You don't see any, you don't attribute a certain value to certain feelings, and you don't upgrade those feelings, you don't downgrade the ones that you don't like. And you simply see the whole flow, the whole process. Actually, thank you for asking me that question. So meditation is a must at that point. You need to be mindful to avoid. Yes, that's right. Yes, that is the vipassana meditation. Yeah, that is insightful. So that is called analytical meditation. Actually, that is vipassana is the self psychoanalysis. Now you learn psychoanalysis in modern psychology, but in Buddhism, it's the vipassana meditation that is the self psychoanalysis. You analyze your own mental conditions and your bodily conditions, your selfhood, the way your selfhood functions, and so that is vipassana. Yes. So that being said, now is what time are you taking a break again?
We are due for one right now.
Okay, let's take a break. Thank you. So can we start?
Yeah, I think we're ready to go.
Okay, yes, thanks. So there can be nothing absolutely free, physical or mental, as everything is interdependent and relative. If free will implies a will independent of conditions, independent of cause and effect, such a thing does not exist. See, that's Venerable Raoul has put it in a beautiful way. If free will implies will independent of condition, independent of cause and effect, such a thing does not exist. So free will, or we cannot have a perfect free will because of the conditions and cause that we have been explaining. So because of relative, our independence is relative. Can dispassionate discernment and interdependence coexist? Yes. Would it create sanya, perception, and vijnana situations for a practitioner? Yes, Sharon. Yes, it does. Yes. So yes, dispassionate discernment and interdependence can coexist. Actually, in the case of practitioners, that's what happens. As you try to use dispassionate discernment, at the same time we continue to be subjective. As long as we are subjective, we are interdependent. So that even after your enlightenment, your body is interdependent. Your mind is interdependent. The only thing is, you don't complain. You don't have any. You don't get afflicted by the interdependent nature of your existence. Enlightened people. For example, now hunger. Hunger leads to when you are hungry, and then you could be sad or angry. In the case of the Buddha, when he is hungry and then and he doesn't get anything to eat, but at that point it doesn't negatively affect him. It doesn't negatively affect him because he sees the relativity. Even if he goes through pain, bodily pain due to hunger, and he would not, because he is not subjective, he is dispassionate, so his discernment is completely dispassionate, so that he continues to, and he is not affected by the continual interdependence. Now, in their attitude, enlightened people don't use a subjective approach. They are objective. Even if their body, their existence is negatively affected by causes and conditions, they don't complain. So that made the big difference between the world, the physical world, the earth, the society, the world of perception is essentially and fundamentally interdependent. And as we try to practice dispassionate discernment, as we try to discern everything, take a close look, observe, see everything in a dispassionate way, and then at the same time, we continue to be interdependent. A practitioner, yeah, you could do that. That's thank you for that idea. Yeah, that's a conclusion too. Now, here again, the idea of free will is basically connected with the ideas of God, soul, justice, reward, and punishment. Not only so-called free will not free, but even the very idea of free will is not free from conditions. Yeah. So it's very difficult. What Venerable Rahula means by that statement, is that the idea of free will is necessarily connected with God, soul, justice, reward, and punishment. That is very common ideas in theistic religions. So that on human level, you cannot enjoy a completely, the perfect free will, because you are responsible. If you are a theistic person, if you believe in theism, if you believe in God, for sure, every time you remind yourself that you are responsible for God, and to that effect, your free will is restricted. So that independence is not, so it is conditioned then. That is also, at that point, your free will is conditioned because you are responsible. You had to obey God, and you are responsible for your own soul, and you are subject to reward and punishment by God. So that even in theistic religion, whichever the type of religion, whichever the kind of religion, as human is the human nature. On the human level, we are not able to have a perfect free will. We can always have restricted free will. We are bound by conditions, causes, and as social beings, we are bound by social, moral, and legal obligations. And at times we need to limit our behavior because we need to make space, create space for other family members, others who love us, and then so that in a professional circle, as a professional, your free will is absolutely limited. So it's limited by professional code of conduct. And then when you are on the highway and you are bound by traffic rules and regulations, so that and in a relationship also, your free will is so restricted, because you live with a partner, and then you are bound by the fact that you need to respect your partner, and you need to respect you cannot be with you have to respect the privacy of your partner, because your partner is not always willing to make himself or herself available to you. And even in a relationship where two people are involved, they are two different personalities, and so that either party, you are both are more responsible for each other's well-being than the fact that you use either party for your own happiness. And you need to respect. Mutual respect is and also contribute towards the restriction of your free will. And then interestingly, in marriage counseling sessions, I have spoken to different couples, and they were living together, and they were in a common law partner, and there was no paperwork. They were not bound by marriage on the paper. They were yet to do the paperwork. But I noticed some people said, and some couples have told me that they would have remained legally unmarried, but they should have been in a common law relationship. Why? When you know that you are permanently, like you are legally married, and so that and then you would feel like you are in that that paperwork has taken your free will away. And I would very often notice this in marriage and divorce counseling. So, and then we do lots of things, so many things to feel a sense of freedom for ourselves in terms of free will. But no matter how hard we try, we are still bound by conditions. So that there's nothing called perfect free will. So according to the doctrine of conditioned genesis, as well as according to the analysis of being into five aggregates, the idea of an abiding, immortal substance in man or outside, whether it is called Atman, I, soul, self, or ego, is considered only a false belief, a mental projection. This is Buddhist doctrine of anatta, no soul or self. See the term here. It's a key term that Venerable Rahula is using. It's a mental projection. It's not a true reality. It's not a true belief. It is simply a mental projection. So together. So that's why we come across that technical term, five aggregates. We did touch upon that. So you can, in order to have so that more clear idea of free will, you can look at that. You can consider free will in light of both conditioned genesis or paticca samuppada or dependent origination, as well as in light of the five aggregates. So that, and we did touch upon that many times. Five aggregate. It's not a single uniformed entity of Atman or I or soul or self or ego, but simply five aggregates. These are the five aggregates, so that we understand our existence in light of five areas of our selfhood. Not why Buddha always comes up with this deconstructive approach, because with this deconstructive approach, the message that he gets across is that we are not uniformed. We are not a single entity. We are bound. We are created by causes and conditions during as long as we exist, as long as we live, we continue to remain bound by conditions. So that there's nothing called perfect free. So that is a false belief. So it's a projection. So selfhood is a mental projection. Now that I like personally. I love that definition. Actually, selfhood, self is a mental projection. So projection in terms of how to say perception. First, we perceive based on our perception, and then we can have a certain projection of our being, and we continue to do that. Sometimes based on our educational qualifications, family background, all that, we come up with a version of self-identity. Actually, it is that self-identity that we come up with based on our background and education. So it is simply a projection. And at the same time, as you are now making a conclusion of your self-identity based on what you have projected on, and you happen to see a friend, a bunch of friends that evening, and they would say that you are more educated than you think you are, or you are much better than you think you are, you are more qualified than you think you are, or you are much less qualified as you think you are, or you think too much of you and you are not as qualified as you think you are. And then you may listen, as you listen to those positive criticisms, or positive remarks or negative remarks, then what happens? As you listen to them, and then you make another projection of yourself, another mental projection. If in case you take it very personal, and in case you consciously or subconsciously approve their negative remarks, at that point you come up with a different mental projection of yourself. In case you are motivated by their remarks, positive remarks, and then your self-projection is way better than the projection that you had this morning as you were going through your certificates, credentials, and your educational backgrounds and your family background. So there's no permanent entity called soul, I, or Atman. It's always, as when Rahula puts it in a beautiful way, it's simply a mental projection. This is called Buddhist doctrine of anatta, and it doesn't have a permanent identity. Our identity changes based on causes and conditions. So it's simply a projection. In order to avoid a confusion, it should be mentioned here that there are two kinds of truths. Here come the two levels of truth, actually. So actually we did discuss that before, and we just touched upon today. Yeah, that's another area of teaching that we need to address, we need to look into, in order to have a firm and clear idea of dependent origination. So conventional truth, that is sammuti, satya, I don't have to type them in there so that you see all the terms here. Sammuti satya or samvruti satya, Pali sammuti, by Sanskrit sangruti. And ultimate truth, that is paramattha satya or paramartha satya. When we use such expressions in our daily life as I, you, being, individual, etc., we do not lie, because there is no self or being as such, but we speak a truth conforming to the convention of the world. So even though according to absolute truth, there is no permanent entity called I, myself, I, selfhood, Atman, etc., but on the conventional level, in day-to-day conversations, we always start from I. Okay, I am tired, I am busy, I am on leave, I am off, I work from home, etc. So it's always subject to expression. So our self-expressions are subjective. So on the conventional, the conventional truth is about our subjective understanding, whereas absolute truth is based on our objective understanding. Again, the two types of approaches: subjective approach. We are subjective beings by nature. So subjective approach, as we said, is built-in, fundamental, and natural, whereas the objective approach is to be purposefully adopted and enhanced, continue to be cultivated. And then, so when we just stick to the subjective approach, we simply rely on sanya and vijnana. And so that at the same time, in case when you look at ourselves, when you redefine ourselves, look at our empirical existence from the objective approach, we start practicing panya, wisdom, that is unbiased knowledge, because it's free from the bias of subjective approach. The more subjective we are biased towards or against the things that we perceive with our sense faculties. So that in case, for example, you don't like graphic arts or the calendar arts or the abstract arts. If you are interested in abstract arts, and then you wouldn't enjoy calendar arts. And those who like calendar arts, they would hate abstract arts because they wouldn't understand that, because you have a different taste. So that if your signature color is red, and when you don't get a t-shirt or a garment or a dress that is red, that is your signature color, and you get something else, and there's no choice, but you still buy that, but you are not happy the way you were planning to be, because you didn't get what you wanted. So at that point, that is a mental projection based on that moment, and you can redefine yourself. Negative you, negative me. At that point, you are given that moment so that you are emotionally down because you didn't get what you wanted. Whereas, quite unexpectedly, you get some better stuff at shopping. And then you can believe your eyes that you got something very valuable for a cheaper price at that point. And there's another unexpectedly positive mental projection of yourself. And that given based on that moment, and you would say subjective, well, I am happy. I never expected something like this at such a cheap price. Well, and you say, okay, it's shocking that I thought I would get what I wanted, but it's not available for me today. So, and then so that we are always using subjective approach. So it is not, it's not improper, as it's not improper, it's proper, and it's okay to express that I, this is me, this is I, you being, and this is me, this is what I want on the conventional level. On the convention, on the conventional level, we are necessarily and we are naturally subjective. And then as one of you defined that clearly, that while we continue to be interdependent, we can have a dispassionate discernment or dispassionate projection of ourselves, so that we are subject to anyway, unless you make a conscious effort to elevate yourself, to reduce your biases. So you will continue to remain on the conventional level. Now, do enlightened people approve or conform to the convention of the world? Yes, they do. That's what Venerable Raoul is doing that. And Buddha would call himself I, himself. And he would simply say, so that if you ask Buddha, are you thirsty? And he would say, and he would simply say yes. If he simply says yes, without specifically, without no mention of I, that's subject to expression, but still yes implies that his answer was subjective, because you asked him, you, right? Are you thirsty? And then he would say yes, meaning he approved your subjective question that you directed at the Buddha. And then but one different story is that when you come across, when you look at the Buddha's personal expressions, he would hardly say, he would hardly he would hardly use the verbal subjectivity, meaning he would hardly say, I am thirsty, it's time for me to go on alms rounds. I am thirsty, I am hungry, and I am tired. He would hardly use that. But his subjectivity is implied, so that even though he doesn't specifically use subjective terms to express himself, and then for the convenience of others who are not yet enlightened, and Buddha would simply conform to the convention of the world, so that he would use conventional expressions and so that everything, but so that as in terms of his mind, which is enlightened, he looks at everything from an objective approach. But at the same time, he doesn't refuse the subjective expressions of convention on the conventional level. If you ask whether a mountain is truly existent, he would say yes, and then you are happy. But he wouldn't say no, mountain doesn't exist. Remember in Augusta, in classroom, I explained that analogy. Now Buddha and myself going to a mountain, and Buddha seeing the mountain, me seeing the mountain at the same thing, and we are talking about the mountain. And then when we were about to leave the place, and I am becoming sad because I feel like staying there, where the Buddha wouldn't think like that, because when he was observing the mountain, he was dispassionate. He didn't attribute less or more value to the mountain, so that it was the mountain itself. While he talked about the mountain with me, and which I could digest, which I could understand. At the same time, the only difference between Buddha and me at that point is I have a passionate attachment, passionate discernment of the mountain. So that's why it's sad. I was sad when I was supposed to leave the mountain, that beautiful, formidable mountain. And the Buddha wasn't sad because his discernment, his observation was dispassionate, free from attachment. Now, so he didn't have a mental projection of the mountain. I have a mental projection of the mountain. Before going to the mountain, I had never seen that before. I had only seen a picture, and I was still struggling. I was so eager. I was so excited to go to the mountain and see. I was anxious to see that. Probably the mountain was more beautiful or less beautiful than it was in the picture, than the picture of it. So that at the same time, if the mountain was more beautiful, and then so that I was happier. If the mountain was not as beautiful as it was in the picture, then I would be less happy. But at the same time, I would be sad when it's time for me to leave the mountain, and probably I would never be able to visit that place again, or probably I would remain anxious until I come back again. Those projections don't occur to Buddha, but those mental projections do occur to me because of myself being subjective. I am using the subjective approach. So, as the Mahayana Sutra Alankara says, it's a beautiful Mahayana Sutra. I read the Sanskrit one. Mahayana Sutra Alankara says, a person, Pudgala is the Sanskrit word, should be mentioned as existing only in designation, prajnapti. Actually, this I must come after T. Prajna, Prajnapti, not Pit. Prajnapti, meaning conventional there is a being, but not in reality or substance. Dravya. Substance is dravya, the Sanskrit word for substance or matter. So that in reality, there is no Pudgala or person existing. but conventionally there's a person. So that's why we are attending this class. I am here, you are in your place, so that we are joined by one another from our own homes, online, on Zoom, online, so that we do exist. There are individuals, we are individuals attending this class. And then you can deny, Buddha doesn't deny that. And you are not lying. You don't lie when you say that you do exist. But at the same time, you don't truly exist in substance. At that point, even though you are not willing to accept the reality that you don't really exist in substance, in reality, in dravya, but at the same time you do exist. Our existence is conventional. Conventional means relative. Our life, our existence as a personality, as a person, as a persona, as an individual is relative. So I am relatively existence. My existence is relative. So that and then my existence is not free from relativity. But according to, going back to the idea of Atman in theistic religions, Atman is not relative. Whereas in Buddhism, if you use the same term in the Buddhist, in light of Buddhism, Atman is not absolute, it is relative, because it is made of few things. And then, so that is one of the two words, conventional truth and absolute truth. And then when Buddha says conventional, when Buddha says, let's say, an individual by whose name is Mark, when he says Mark does exist, and thereby Buddha doesn't lie. He's not lying when he says that Mark does exist. There's an individual, Mark by name, and he comes from this and that background. But at the same time, and Buddha is defining Mark, the individuality of Mark, the personality of Mark in conventional terms. But when he point at Mark and I'm standing with him, and then I would simply say, okay, there's an individual. But to me, the way I project, the way I create a mental projection of Mark is very different than the projection of the Buddha. Actually, Buddha doesn't make mental projections. He have the same idea. Okay, in substance, in dravya, in reality, Mark doesn't exist. And so that, but in my eyes, Mark does exist. And I would also, so that continue to identify him, define him, and see whether it's a good Mark is a good person or a bad person. And then as long as he is friendly with me, I create a mental projection of Mark being a good person. And he breaks up and he counters my arguments and he doesn't approve my ideas. And so that I feel defensive, I become defensive of his approach. And then I would say, okay, then I create a different mental projection of Mark. Okay, Mark is a bad person. Why? Because he doesn't agree with me. He doesn't agree to my ideas. But Buddha's mindset is free from that. He doesn't have that. He doesn't make that distinction between Mark being a good person or Mark being a bad person. Because on the conventional level, we make all those distinctions. We create all those discriminations. And then the negation of an imperishable Atman is the common characteristic of all dogmatic systems of the lesser as well as the greater vehicle. But at this time, he's using traditional Buddhist terms, lesser vehicle. But Venerable Rahula wrote this book in 1960s or 70s, by which time still the term lesser vehicles means Theravada, based on Pali canon, on the Pali canon. And the greater vehicle is the Mahayana, as you know. Vehicle is yana means vehicle. And then dogmatic systems lesser and as well as greater vehicle. And there is therefore no reason to assume the Buddhist tradition, which is in complete agreement on this point, has deviated from the Buddha's original Buddhist teaching. Well, the point he makes is, it doesn't matter which Buddhist tradition, Theravada or Mahayana, so that the idea that a person is not truly existence in substance, but he does exist conventionally, is acceptable to all the Buddhist traditions, whether Theravada or Mahayana. And then see that shunyata, right? Emptiness, no self, non-self. Now, until we did, I think we had a few rounds of discussions on no self, non-self, and shunyata and emptiness in our previous sessions and in Augusta, in class sessions. So still, no matter how many times you think about shunyata, emptiness, but still, as conventional beings, some of us may still continue to struggle to understand what no self is, because it's too early, as Buddha suggests elsewhere, is as long as you are not enlightened, is you cannot perceive what is called no self. Why? No self idea of some understanding of no self is possible, emptiness is possible when you use the objective approach. As long as you use the subjective approach, you wouldn't be able to come up with a clear notion, clear idea of no self, because subjective approach, so that we start our definition of self-identity, definition of Pudgala or person or any other object as with the belief that things truly exist. So that is when what we do is, by using the subjective approaches, we don't look into the true nature of the Pudgala person or any other object, any other reality. What we do is we try to struggle our struggle, or we, instead of looking into the true reality, true nature of the individual that we are talking about, we simply tend to do something else, and that something else is whether that person is acceptable to me or not. That's what we do. And whether to keep the person at a distance, or just to invite the person individually into your inner circle. And that's what we basically do. So that in looking at people as subjective beings, we are naturally inclined to see, to see whether the object or the person is acceptable, or he must be rejected. So in our case, it is always acceptance and rejection criteria. That is the typical criteria that we use, acceptance, rejection criteria. And so that is why we always get blocked. So that that acceptance, rejection criteria that we automatically, naturally use, even subconsciously use, we find it difficult to move up, and then just to practice, just to have a dispassionate projection, dispassionate idea, and so that a conclusion of the individual that we are talking about that is free from attachment, we find it difficult. So that is why That's why we find it difficult to understand or grasp or to realize no self or sunyata. So the sunyata or shunyata or emptiness is when we see that the individual is that individual does not exist in substance, in dravya, but he does exist so that conventionally, because we agree, so that to the convention of the world, we got to confirm. So, and that's how that is where the problem of sunyata or no self in our case. And so that even no matter how many times you define no self, how many times you try to understand no self, always your approach is subjective. And so that you you end up with the same conclusion that there is nothing called no self, or shunyata is fake, or maybe shunyata or emptiness is true, but I am not able to grasp it. And you might always end up with suspicion, uncertainty, and that uncertainty is because of the fundamental problem of the subjective approach. It is therefore curious that recently there should have been a vain attempt by a few schools to smuggle the idea of self into the teaching of the Buddha, quite contrary to the spirit of Buddhism. These scholars respect, admire, and venerate the Buddha and his teaching. They look up to Buddhism, but they cannot imagine that the Buddha, whom they consider the most clear and profound thinker, could have denied the existence of an Atman or self, which they need so much. Actually, Venerable Rahul is talking about this romantic approach, romantic identification of Buddhism. Because I never happened to ask that, because he might have written, elaborated on that elsewhere in his teachings. But he's talking about a trend, scholarly trend of by the time he was writing this book. I think he wrote this book when he was a researcher at Sorbonne University in France, and that is in the 1960s or 70s, and that was the time that religious studies scholars were so that they were starting to write about Buddhism. And what Venerable Rahula means by this statement is to come up with a romantic definition of Buddhism. And Buddha is no different than any other one, and Buddha would accept the Atman, existence of Atman. And then indirectly, what he's saying indirectly is, most probably he's talking about Hindu scholars, Hindus who are scholars of Buddhist studies. Because I personally, most of my friends are Hindu scholars, because I studied Hinduism more than Buddhism. So that, and to Hindus, Buddhism is an offshoot of Hinduism, culturally so. Remember the last time we in our discussion on the three signs of existence, how for the first time Buddha made a statement of Atman that was very different, that was against a well-established idea of Atman in the theistic Indian religious culture. And then, yes, I think that is what Rahul is talking about here. Now, Atman or self, which they need so much. And what he says is that people have difficulty getting rid of the theistic notion of existence. Consciously or subconsciously, some scholars maintain a theistic notion of self. And then they find it difficult to walk away from that theistic notion. And then, so it is genetic, it is cultural as well. So, And then it is better to say frankly that one believes in an Atman or self. Or one may even say that the Buddha was totally wrong in denying the existence of an Atman. But certainly it will not do for anyone to try to introduce into Buddhism an idea which the Buddha never accepted, as far as we can see from the extant original text. Actually, this statement defines Buddhism, because Buddha is different than all of his contemporary, all other teachers and of his time, based on based on his rejection of Atman. So he rejected that. He rejected Atman as a permanent entity. And that is where Buddha is that's where the Buddha is different from other scholars, other religious people of his time that were contemporary with him. So that, but still, and the religions which believe in God and soul make no secret of these two ideas. On the contrary, they proclaim them constantly and repeatedly in the most eloquent terms. If the Buddha had accepted these two ideas, so important in all religions, he certainly would have declared them publicly, as he had spoken about other things, and would not have left them hidden to be discovered only 25 centuries after his death. The statement is about the fact, if Buddha wanted to accept, and he would have mentioned that straight in his teachings. Nowhere in his teachings has the Buddha accepted Atman as a permanent entity. Actually, all his teaching, two specific fundamental teachings of Buddhism are based on his rejection of Atman as a permanent entity. What are those two? This one, dependent origination or paticca samuppada, and the second one that we already discussed, tilakkana, or the three signs of existence. Those are the two fundamental teachings that are clearly based on the Buddha's rejection of Atman as a permanent entity. But Buddha, as we have discussed before, but he borrowed the same term, right? Because atta is Atman, Atman in Pali. But as you know, I think I touched on that word 3 or 4 times. But he added another word to Atman, that's Atta Bhava. So that streaming, continually changing, streaming or continually changing Atman. He borrowed the same term, because Atta is a Prakrit word, Atman is a Sanskrit word. And he added the word, he defined the characteristics of Atman with the term Bhava. Bhava, as you know, it comes from Bhava, and see Bhava Raga, we discussed the term Bhava, to be, to re-become, to become. Now Atman or Atta constantly re-becomes. It constantly turns itself into something else, so that it's not permanent. It's not permanent, it is not absolute. So, but he used the same term. And even today in predominantly Buddhist countries like in Sri Lanka, whenever they explain art, when they talk about their consciousness that would move, that would leave the body and become reintegrated into another corporeality, thereby creating another life form, they use the word Atma They say my Atman. But to a Buddhist, even a Buddhist uses the term Atman, to him or her, Atman doesn't mean a permanent entity. And then so that in his understanding is that Atman is not a permanent entity, but a conditionally altered, conditionally adulterated, conditionally modified, and then condition something is an entity. It's an entity that is bound by conditions, that is modified and adulterated by conditions. So that's the clear definition. Buddha used the same word. Actually, he happened to. So that's why when you look at the Buddha's teachings, he has dedicated considerable time to redefine the terms that he borrowed from the contemporary religions, especially like Hinduism. Atman, and then he would say, well, and then in a conversation with the Brahmin, he would say, and both are now talking about Atman. And then when the Brahmin asked the Buddha whether Buddha accepts Atman, and he would say, yes. When Buddha says yes, and the Brahmin is elated to hear that, and then Buddha would ask why you are smiling and you are so happy, and it says because you accept Atman, you believe in Atman. And Buddha would say, my belief in Atman is way different than your belief. How and why? And then Buddha would again explain. And then he would explain Atman as something conditional, not absolute. So people become nervous at the idea that through the Buddha's teachings of anatta means no soul, no self, the self they imagine they have is going to be destroyed. The Buddha was not unaware of this. Actually, it's funny that I have been asked multiple times by different people whether at enlightenment they would get their self destroyed. They understand, because that is the subjective imagination of self, because there's nothing to be destroyed. There's nothing of the Atman, of ourself, there's nothing to be destroyed. It is not intact anyway. It is not real in substance anyway. Our Atman is made of so many things. It's conditional anyway. At enlightenment, what you do is you understand that, you realize that right now what's happening to us is the reality is still already there, and we haven't, even if you don't understand, even if you are yet to understand that your Atman is not an absolute entity, so that and even after you realize that Atman is not an absolute entity, in either case you don't lose anything. Why? Atman is conditional anyway. So, and that's Buddha, and this the Venerable Rahula puts it in a fascinating way, that some people would imagine that they are scared of enlightenment because in case they get enlightened, they will lose their self. There's no such thing. Again, this is the subjective imagination, subjectively created fear of Atman. And then Buddha says, and so that's a Venerable Rahula is directing us to a conversation that Buddha had with a monk. A bhikkhu once asked him, Sir, Buddha asked a bhikkhu, a monk asked the Buddha, Sir, is there a case where one is tormented when something permanent within oneself is not found? Yes, bhikkhu, there is, answered the Buddha. A man has the following view. The universe is that Atman. I shall be that after death, permanent, abiding, everlasting, unchanging, and I shall exist as for eternity. He hears the Tathagata means the Buddha, or a disciple of this, preaching the doctrine aiming at the complete destruction of all speculative views aiming at the extinction of thirst, that is Trishna, aiming at detachment, cessation, nirvana, then the man thinks, I will be annihilated, I will be destroyed, I will be no more. So he mourns, worries himself, laments, weeps, beating his breast, and becomes bewildered. Thus, O Bhikkhu, there is a case where one is tormented when something permanent within oneself is not found. Elsewhere, the Buddha says, O Bhikkhus, this idea that I may not be, I may not have, is frightening to the uninstructed worldling. The uninstructed worldling means people like me, who is yet to be trained, who is yet to go through some spiritual training, at the end of which I would necessarily understand that I don't lose anything when I get enlightened. What happens is that I am now seeing a truth, a reality that I had failed to see, because I did believe that my Atman was permanent, and now I see it is not permanent. It's not a permanent entity, so that I'm not losing anything. Actually, I gain something. I gain something that is good. I'm having how to say, the realistic project idea of our Atman. And at that point, I see Atman as not truly existent. I don't lose it anything. But again, why that fear? Why that? Why someone gets tormented is because of the subjective approach to Atman. Because prematurely, a subjective individual tends to think that in case he gets enlightened, he will lose everything. There's no losing anything. Nothing to lose, actually. Actually, you gain something. You have a clear idea of self-existence. And those who want to find a self in Buddhism argues as follows. Now, here comes, he touches on an argument. The argument is, it is true that the Buddha analyzes being into matter, sensation, perception, mental formations, and consciousness. Do you know these? These are the five aggregates. And Venerable Rahul is using different terms. Being into matter, that is our physical body, that is rupa, and sensation, that is vedana, and perception, that is sanya, and in mental formation, that's sankhara, and the consciousness, that is vijnana, and says that none of these things is self, but he does not say that there is no self at all in man or anywhere else apart from these aggregates. So that's the argument. So that a self, because they find solace in an implied statement of the Buddha that Buddha did not reject Atman. Of course, in fact, he did accept Atman. And so that you can argue, but that Buddha did not reject an idea of Atman. So that's why Venerable Rahula is elaborating on that argument here. So any questions about that so far? I know it's purely academic and philosophical. That's how the fundamental teachings of Buddhism are. Probably because we are not talking about social things, unlike we did during our previous coursework, Introduction to the History of Buddhism. But here is more philosophical, thought-provoking, actually. So we are in a thought-provoking mode. I think that's the nature of this this coursework here, because this is all philosophy. So now how many? We have 15 more minutes, right? We end at 4:30, right? So this position is untenable for two reasons. One is that according to Buddha's teachings, a being is composed only of these five aggregates and nothing more. See, that's why Buddha doesn't talk about anything outside of these five aggregates. So if you see a Buddhist counterpart or the Buddhist or what resembles Atman, it is the aggregate of consciousness that resembles Atman. So the Buddha was smart, and then in his definition of consciousness, he said that he doesn't accept Atman as being a permanent entity. Instead, so that he implies that there's nothing called Atman, it is purely consciousness. It is the consciousness that leads to the creation of leads to the creation of a new birth, a rebirth. So nowhere has he said that there was anything more than these five aggregates in the being. The second reason is that the Buddha denied categorically in unequivocal terms in more than one place the existence of Atman, soul, self, or ego within man or without or anywhere else. That's throughout his teachings, he has used a language of deconstruction. Actually, this is called in philosophy, this is called deconstructionism. That when you define things, you analyze things by deconstructing the reality or the concept that you talk about into different areas or into different pieces. And that is called the deconstructive approach. And so that's when Buddha purposely call selfhood, self, the five aggregates, instead of calling it the individual or the Puddgala. But that doesn't mean that he has not, and he has of course used the conventional term Puddgala or individual. But in his philosophical definition of Atman, he doesn't use the term Puddgala or individual. Instead, he used the five aggregates, that it is not one thing that is Atman, that is individual, but it is the combination of five things together that form what is called self or I or Atman. And then and he explains another example actually. So let us take some example. In the Dhammapada, there are three verses extremely important, essential Buddhas. They are number 5, 6, and 7 or chapter 20. It's no time for us to go through them. Probably you can go on Google and see what says and see the corresponding idea in this that are contained in these verses, number 5, 6, and 7 of chapter 20 verses. He talks about, he put that here. The first two verses say, all conditioned things are impermanent, sabbe sankhara anicca, and all conditioned things are dukkha, sabbe sankhara dukkha. The third verse says, all dhammas are without self. So here it should be carefully observed that in the first two verses, the word sankhara, conditioned things, is used, but in its place in the third verse, the word sankhara is not verse, but the dhamma is used. Why did in the third verse use the word sankhara, conditioned things, as the previous two verses, and why did it use the term dhamma instead? Here lies the crux of the whole matter. Actually, these three, I think once I came across a book, I saw a big book written on these three verses. Why the first two called sankharas and third one called dhamma. The term sankhara denotes the five aggregates, all conditioned, interdependent, relative thing and states, both physical and mental. If the third verse said all sankhara conditioned things are without self, then one might think that although conditioned things are without self, yet there may be a self outside conditioned things, outside the five aggregates. It is in order to avoid misunderstanding that the term Dhamma is used in the third verse. So the Buddha's linguistic ability, etymological effort, he has used etymology to define these two. So the Dhamma means, so the condition, so the Sankharas are the five aggregates. And then, so that if we use the Sankhara for the third one also, then thereby he would have conveyed a wrong message that Buddha did accept Atman outside of these five aggregates. So there's nothing without the five aggregates, everything is within. So we had 10 more minutes. Any questions for today? No? So you can, we have 10 minutes for question and answers, Q&A. And please read the rest of the chapter, because I love this chapter. It requires, when Rahula's book, What the Buddha Taught, is considered a masterpiece, because he has mentioned so many things between the lines, and there are so many implications, underlying ideas. So I heard that, I think he told me himself when I met him for the second time before his death at the university, that I think at that time he didn't have a typewriter. I think he purchased thousands of, few dozens of bundle of papers, printing papers. And then overnight he would write few chapters. By the time he, chapter 7 is even better. That's right, yeah. So by the time he woke up, took a nap, and he would continue to write overnight. And then so that there were hundreds of pages that he had used, and then he would go through them after a nap, and he would trash them again. Why? He wasn't happy, because he wrote the chapters again and again, so that he told me that he wasted so many pages, but it never went wasted, because he wrote the book with carefully used terminology here. So that then this means, according to Theravada teaching, that there is no self either in the individual, Pudgala, or in Dhammas, means realities. The Mahayana Buddhist philosophy maintains exactly the same position without the slightest difference on this point, putting emphasis on Dharma Nairatmya as well as on Pudgala Nairatmya. Dharma Nairatmya means soullessness of realities, Dharma. And in one of our, during our future lesson on Nirvana, we will describe these two terms, Dharma Nairatmya. Nairatmya means absence of soul. Any reality, any phenomena is without a substance of soul. And Pudgala Nairatmya, and needless to say, inanimate things, other realities, other phenomena does not contain an Atman. And then as on Pudgala Nairatmya means, Pudgala is the individual, an individual is without soul. So that Dhammas, so phenomena, they don't contain Atman. Pudgala Nairatmya, an individual does not have an Atman within. Atman in terms of a permanent entity. Yes, yes. Would one conclude that consciousness may equate to that of the impermanent Atmas? Yes, my friend, yes. Also the philosophy or the technique of Shunyata primarily leads one to realize the existence is primarily composed or proposed Five Aggregates by the Buddha. Yes, absolutely. See, I love your conclusions, right? I simply to keep talking and you make conclusions. Thank you. Everyone is very smart. That's why I enjoy this class. That being said, now we have 5 more minutes. Now, in the Alagadupama Sutta of the Majjhima Nikaya, addressing his disciples, the Buddha said, "O bhikkhus, accept a soul theory." Attavada. Atta means, vada means theory. Accept a soul theory, attavada, in the acceptance of which there would not arise grief, lamentation, suffering, distress, and tribulation. But do you see, O bhikkhus, such a soul theory in the acceptance of which there would not arise grief, lamentation, suffering, distress, and tribulation? The acceptance, certainly not, sir. Good, O bhikkhus, I too, O bhikkhus, do not see a soul theory in the acceptance of which there would not arise grief, lamentation, suffering, distress, and tribulation. Now, if there is, so that in case during our empirical existence, if we happen to if we happen to encounter, experience grief, disappointment, sense of unfulfillment, and so that feeling left out, all that, then at that point, that would help us to conclude that there is no permanent entity within. If there is a permanent entity within, that should have come to our rescue. That's what Buddha meant by this question and answer here. So we have 3 more minutes left. Any questions? So if there had been any soul theory which the Buddha had accepted, he would certainly have explained it here, because he asked the bhikkhus to accept that soul theory which did not produce suffering. Because if there was a soul theory, attavada, that would prevent us from suffering, that would never produce suffering, then he would have accepted that. But there's no such thing. If it is a permanent thing, then it should come to our rescue, because it's permanent. Because there's no such thing, and Buddha did not accept an Atman. So that you, as you say in your, so that question, that consciousness may equate to the impermanent Atman. That's the way. And Buddha used the same word, an Atman, but that is an impermanent Atman, not a permanent Atman. So that is conscious, based on consciousness. So the continuing, so that which one? Buddha's view, there is no soul theory, and any soul theory, whatever it may be, however subtle and sublime, is false and imaginary, creating all kind of problems, producing in strain, grief, lamentation, suffering, distress, tribulation, and trouble. Continuing the discourse, the Buddha said in the same sutta, "O bhikkhus, when neither self nor anything pertaining to self can truly and really be found, this speculative view, the universe is that Atman soul. I shall be there after death, permanent, abiding, everlasting, unchanging, and I shall exist as such for eternity. Is it not wholly and completely foolish?" Here the Buddha explicitly states that an Atman or soul or self is nowhere to be found in reality. In reality means in Dravya, according to the Mahayana Sutra, in substance. And it is foolish to believe there is such a thing. So that those who seek a self in the Buddha's teaching quote a few examples which they first translate wrongly, and they misinterpret. One of them is the will, non-line, atta. Attahi attano nato, from the Dhammapada, which is translated as self is the Lord of self. And they interpret to mean, actually this is one of the earliest German and British translations, attahi attano nato, self with the Lord self, because they simply translated the earliest translation of Dhammapada was done by the Germans and then by the British. And then that's why an American Buddhist monk, Venerable Bhikkhu Bodhi, and he has retranslated the Pali in simple English language, so that now the American translation is more highly regarded as more authentic than the early British translations. So that's attahi attano nato, self with the Lord itself, then interpreted to mean, but actually what Buddha means by that is, first of all, this translation is incorrect. Atta here does not mean self in the sense of soul. In Pali, the word atta is generally used as a reflective or indefinite pronoun, except in a few cases where it specifically and philosophically refers to the soul theory, as we have seen above. But in general usage, as in the chapter in the Dhammapada, there this line occurs, and in many other places, it is used as a reflective and indefinite pronoun, meaning myself, yourself, himself, or oneself, etc. So next to the word nato, nata is Lord actually, does not mean Lord, but refuge, support, help, protection, because it has different meanings. Therefore, attahi attano nato really means one is one's own refuge. See the vast difference between the two translations. First one is self is the Lord of self. Second translation is one is one's own refuge. One is one's own help or support. It has nothing to do with any metaphysical soul or self. It simply means that you have to rely on yourself and not on others. I think that's all we need from this chapter. So that being said, any last questions, my friend? No, right? And please study the chapter leisurely, and then so that as you know, we are not going to have more textbooks for this fundamental teachings of Buddhism course. And then so that because fundamental teachings of Buddhism class is way more difficult than the previous one, so that I'm using my liberty just to have one textbook. But at the same time, in the future, and then you are free to use online, other printed or online peer-reviewed academic articles, and you can bring some ideas, some scholars' ideas into your writings. And so that very soon I will post on Slack some critical questions that you would keep in the back of your mind when you study this book and when you study your class notes. And those questions, and you can gather data around those questions so that would help you for your final exams. Thank you.
Thank you, Bhante.
Thank you, Bhante.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Bhante. See you tomorrow.
See you tomorrow. Okay, see you tomorrow, everyone. Thanks. Thank
Thanks,
you.
Bhante.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.